Warren, and I'm currently the director of CCARD, the new Center for Indigenous Knowledge for Agriculture and Rural Development, which was established here at Iowa State formally October 1987. We pile of them up here, and the next newsletter should be coming out in a couple of weeks. The newsletter's generated a tremendous amount of interest in the role of indigenous knowledge in decision making in rural development. There have been news notes in a variety of international journals about CCARD, and we now have a network of more than 1,200 institutions, agencies, individuals in more than 100 countries on our mailing list, and we are receiving, I think, close to 500 documents from all over the world in the last 4 or 5 months, and we're in the process of cataloging and indexing these. One of the things we are trying to do is provide an international network that will facilitate the recording of indigenous knowledge systems to facilitate agricultural development in particular. And we're doing that in part through formal linkages that Iowa State has set up. One of them was with the Institute of Cultural and Social Studies, the University of Leiden, and we have Dr. Slickerveer here and his wife. He'll be giving the lecture tomorrow night. We have our speaker tonight, Professor Adedotun Phillips, who is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research. It's the premier research institute in Nigeria. It falls directly under the President's office for the country, so there's an awful lot of activity. Professor Adedotun managed to fit us in, flew 30 hours from Lagos to get here by 11 o'clock last night and leaves to fly back to Lagos tomorrow. So we have to take advantage of them while we've got them. CCARD now has, I think we're up to 8 research associates with graduate students from a variety of disciplines: international development studies, agricultural education, sociology, development anthropology, working on a variety of rather exciting topics. We have quite a number of faculty on this campus tied in with us, again from a variety of disciplines: agronomy, sociology, economics, agricultural education, etc. We're fortunate to have secured some initial support for our activities, and we want to thank the GTE Foundation for providing us the resources to bring in our international guests. Paul Richards has come in from the University of London. Some of you are familiar with his books, and he will be lecturing Friday evening. In addition to the GTE Foundation, we've had support from the Iowa State University Lectures Committee, the Graduate College, CCARD, the Iowa State University chapter of the Society for International Development, and support from the ISU Nigerian, Dutch, and British Students Associations. To date, our most important benefactor has been Pioneer Hybrid International, and some months ago I was meeting with Donald Duvik, one of the executive vice presidents, and telling him about some of our activities, and he encouraged us to send some of the material. So I sent those, and it wasn't too long before we got a call from Ken Mishra, the director of plant breeding, and he's in charge, as Jeff has told me, of plant breeding operations in third world nations. And he, in fact, is out in Nigeria right now with meetings at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. He was very interested in what we were trying to do, and he and Jeff Beard, who works with him as Director of Administration and Plant Breeding Division, gave us what seems to us a very large sum of money, and we've spent it real fast on some fancy computer equipment that will help us document all of these documents coming in. And tonight he's come to help us introduce our distinguished visitor. I might also mention in the back room, some of you will recognize former Lieutenant Governor Bob Anderson, who just returned from Nigeria. Been out there for 3 weeks, moving from one end of the country to the other, and hopefully things work out. Given our link with NYSER and Ibadan, and the University of Iowa's link with the University of Ibadan, over time we hope that we'll be able to achieve a sister state link with Oyo State in Nigeria. Bob was able to find out that out of all 50 states in the United States, only Ohio has a link with any country in Africa, and that's with Anambra State in Nigeria. And given all of our ties here on campus, it makes a lot of sense. We're also fortunate to be able to bring in Dr. Oni Bokun with the help of Dr. Shin and his colleagues in regional planning. He's another colleague of Dr. Titi Lola, who's over here. He's on sabbatical from NYSER with us. Dr. Oni Bokun is from NYSER, and he's on sabbatical at the University of Illinois. There still are some staff working with you in Ibadan, I think. What I'd like to do now is turn the floor over to our chairperson for this first lecture. It's Mr. Jeff Beard, who's been very supportive of us from Pioneer Hybrid. He's the Director of Administration for the Plant Breeding Division.
Thanks very much, Mike. And I might say on behalf of Pioneer Hybrid, we're delighted to be able to help in the sponsoring of CCARD and some of the events here tonight. I think the mission of CCARD with gathering indigenous knowledge and helping organizations establish, come into countries is very consistent with our mission as an agribusiness, which is, we believe, to help the world's farmers and extend our particular seed technology. We're in the process of doing that. Pioneer has, in the last 10 years, expanded its operations into a little over 30 countries. And so we need all the help we can get, and it's organizations like CCARD that assist us or facilitate our entry into a lot of countries for which we don't have a lot of knowledge. So we're delighted to be able to help with that. Just to get on with the show, I'd like to introduce Dr. Antidodum Phillips, who is the Director General of Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research, which is NYSER, in Ibadan, Nigeria. And Mike didn't mention, but Iowa State has a formal linkage with NYSER since 1986, I believe. Dr. Phillips was Professor of Economics and Head of the Department of Economics and Dean of Social Sciences, University of Ibadan, prior to becoming Director General of NYSER. He was a former Director of Research at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies in Nigeria, visiting professor at Princeton and Michigan, and he has published extensively on rural development and planning. So with that, help me welcome Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to talk really, although I'm supposed to be talking. My presence here, the major purpose of my being here is really to register my own personal support and the very strong support of my institute for the experiment where the path-breaking activities that Mike had started here in Iowa. Looking at the outfit that he has been able to put together during the past 2 years, I can say that he has already made very considerable progress. I also find that nobody else in the United States is doing something like that. You may have a eureka, on your hands by the time Mike has finished with his activity. And I want to be particularly associated with that idea. And I can assure Mike that he's already succeeding considerably from what I've said. And he has already succeeded in doing at least one thing. I now know how to spell indigenous. When I was in the university, there were two words I could never spell. One of them was indigenous. The second one was occasion. And I remember my professor used to really hammer me with those two words. I still don't know how to spell occasion. I don't know whether it is double C or double S or, But now I can spell indigenous. I even know how to pronounce it very well now, thanks to what Mike had started, some 2 years ago. I'm sure with what has been done so far, there is nothing but success in front of that program. I am hoping that the authorities of this university will give CCAD the appropriate institutional recognition. Right now, it's only existing along the corridor with about 3 or 4 rooms. But you can see that the contacts that they have made with the rest of the world is far in excess of what that narrow corridor, would tend to convey to you. And I hope that by the time this particular program settles down, we'll have some mighty building, as it were. And all the things that go with a center of such international standing would actually come along. At my institute, we also have started something similar to this, as part of this network. Our intention is, in fact, not to restrict our own study of indigenous knowledge systems to agriculture and rural development alone. We are going to adopt a much more comprehensive coverage so that we'll be able to cover not just agriculture and rural development, we're going to look at economics, we're going to look at all sorts of things, all these things that we put together. So that by the time our own outfit is really operational, we'll be able to use it as a springboard, to affect the rest of Africa as far as identifying, collecting, documenting, storing, and adapting indigenous knowledge systems, for general development, is concerned. So I want to particularly wish Mike very well in this exercise. That's my major purpose. Now, having said all of that, what do you want me to talk about? You still want me to talk about indigenous knowledge systems? I don't know. I'll tell you how I came into this particular matter. Basically, I am an economist, and an economist of the Salas Manas variety. The type that have a lot of money, in the box. They open the box, they count the money, they're sure the money is still there, and they put it back in the box, and they sit beside the box. They don't want to spend the money. The only way they look at any particular issue, any matter in this world is through the prism of finance. I happen to belong to that school. And finance people are terrible people. They never want to really achieve too many things in rare quantities. Everything has to be denominated in financial matters. But just before I assumed my current position, two things, of course, happened to me. I spent some time being the chairman of the Nigerian Industrial Development Bank. And during the time I was there, in that bank, it coincided with the period when Nigeria was facing very horrendous economic problems, arising principally from the very serious shortage of foreign exchange. So we then had to start looking internally for how we can become considerably self-reliant. having regard to the fact that the production system that we have on the ground has an import dependence ratio of about 70%, around 1983, 84, 85, 86. Now, when Nigeria, of course, was enjoying the oil boom, we were earning so much dollars. All that was important was to set up the factory and to assume that the components, the inputs, the spare parts, the everything, would come from abroad. And all you needed to do was to just simply finish up, the manufacturing process and then get things sold. Now, that was all right from the 70s up to the middle, slightly late 70s. And then, of course, when the crunch then came, our manufacturing industry started, of course, to operate at lower and lower capacity utilization. And the basic question then came up that, look, if we were going to continue to operate these enterprises, then we had better start to source their raw materials and their inputs from within the territory of Nigeria itself. So the name of the game became self-reliance. Now, when the World Bank and the IMF started to do their own thing in Nigeria, they said we should adopt a structural adjustment program. We then said, yes, we are going to adopt a structural adjustment program, but for what purpose? What was going to be the overriding preoccupation, of that program? And a lot of debate went on. There was a general consensus that the overriding preoccupation has to be self-reliance. But many of us then asked the question, self-reliance in what? Most people tended to answer that question by saying self-reliance in terms of local sourcing of raw materials. In other words, the enterprises, the manufacturing facilities that we already have in hand, if we can succeed to source them locally from the raw materials, the agricultural produce, the minerals, and all of that, that are available, then of course the structural adjustment program would have achieved its purpose. A few of us departed from that answer. We did not believe that self-reliance really should start from there. In fact, some of us believed that there was a hierarchy of self-reliance, and that unless one followed that hierarchy properly, and you go it stage by stage, putting it in rather simple terms, true self-reliance can really not be achieved. So, we then said, look, first of all, we have to be self-reliant as far as feeding ourselves are concerned. That unless a people can feed itself, there is absolutely no way in which the people there can claim to be self-reliant. And in my part of Nigeria, where I come from, there is a saying, and I'll say it in Yoruba, that tí ebi bá kúrò nínú ìṣẹ́, ìṣẹ́ ti tán. In other words, when hunger has been removed from poverty, poverty has lost its edge. I think during the seminar that we had this afternoon, somebody, I think it was a lady, the linguist, who's trying to study some proverbs, to find out. I've just given you one. I will come and collect my royalty later. So I picked on that particular saying, that once you take hunger out of poverty, poverty has lost its edge. My country is a very poor country, never mind what the rest of the world says. If the country is going to be self-reliant, it had better start, first of all, by feeding itself. But then it didn't stop at that. If the people succeed in feeding themselves, but they are feeding themselves with other people's knowledge, then, of course, they cannot claim to be self-reliant. If you are growing your food, growing your staple food in a place like Nigeria, comprising of yam, and cassava and beans and maize, but you are growing these with imported knowledge that has been developed on the farms of Iowa or the experimental stations of London or something like that, then of course you could not possibly be self-reliant. Which means that we still have to go further up. There is still something else about self-reliance that is still missing. And that is that true self-reliance has to start with self-reliance in knowledge. You can then move, you can apply your own knowledge, your own local knowledge, to the production of food. And then true self-reliance can really begin. Once you start from there, you can then advance. Get up your own technology to be able to process your own locally available resources in order to produce the inputs and the components for your factory. So we then came up with that hierarchy and argued it successfully, within the circles of government, that true self-reliance starts with self-reliance in knowledge. And then, of course, it goes on like that. There is no chalk here. Anyway, I think I've described what I mean. So, true self-reliance then starts with self-reliance in knowledge. Some of us then ask the question, if we must start by feeding ourselves with our own knowledge, are there certain indigenous knowledge systems that are now available that we can readily tap and apply this to food production so that the self-reliance process can be properly started and put on the track? So that was how I got involved in this matter. Structural adjustment program, self-reliance in what? Started with food produced by whose knowledge? It must be your own knowledge, by and large. And that way, you can then really be sure that you are achieving true self-reliance. Then, of course, when we talk about food, it is not all food. We have to start at some particular level. And we did an analysis of the structure of Nigerian food, and then discovered, on the basis of studies that have been done, that about 40% of the food that Nigerians eat consists of grains. The remaining 60% are picked up by root crops, by protein, and by other food items. But the largest single component of the food basket consisted of grain. We also found, on the basis of empirical studies that have been done, that about 30 to 40% of Nigeria's output of grain was lost every year, arising out of deficient post-harvest processing, comprising of either shelling, fumigation, some sort of chemical treatment, storage, and so on like that. Which meant that in the short term, within a period of 1 year to 2 years, if you wanted to be self-reliant in the proper way, as far as food was concerned, your first port of call had to be grain. So, I then called some of the officials in my institute. One of them is here, Dr. Titilola. And I posed them that question, that look, I am not an agriculturist, I am not even an agricultural economist, I am just a plain, simple economist. But I now have a question for you. Are there indigenous knowledge systems in grain storage that we can quickly mobilize in order to achieve significant self-reliance in food in the short term? I posed that question to him and to one of his colleagues, Dr. Adiyeye. And I said, look, let us go to town. Let us go and find out if we have in this country now certain indigenous grain storage techniques that can be quickly identified and mobilized in order to reduce that wastage of 30 to 40% of grains that we lose every year, in order to ensure that the 40% component of our food that is made up of cereal is actually available. If we can in fact cover that 40% wastage, we would have increased the food supply by almost 25%. So, very simple question there. Indigenous grain storage techniques. So that is how I then got my colleagues to start looking at that particular issue. We put up a proposal, got it properly funded, and the work has only just started. And I can begin to see the future at the end of that research project, the sorts of things that are likely to come out. A number of preliminary results have come out. We selected, for pre-testing purposes, 3 states in Nigeria: Anambra State, Oyo State, and Kano State. From each of those 3 states, we selected 2 local governments, and from the local governments, we selected 40 farmers in each of them. The farmers, all of this, of course, was done under random sampling techniques. And then, right now, we are testing the questionnaires, as well as observing, as well as using that sociological methodology, participant observation, getting 1 or 2 of our researchers to actually live, with the farmer and watch him, how he processes the grain, what he does as far as storing the grain is concerned, whether he uses any traditional fumigation methods, what are his own wastage ratios, to what extent are these techniques efficient and effective. Efficient in terms of cost, effective in terms of the totality of the grain that can be stored, and after storage, what happens as far as dryness is concerned, what happens as far as germination is concerned, and so on like that. All of these things have been done. And some of the results are coming out now at a preliminary level, like I said, and some of them are very exciting. In one of the local governments, for example, that we looked at, virtually all the farmers there use the technique of storing their grain over the fireplace on platforms built a little bit over the fireplace. They keep the corn inside the leaves. They don't shell it. Not just leaving the corn on the cob. They leave the corn right inside the leaves, and they put it on that platform, and they're able to store that way, for about 6 months. The farmers explained that the smoke from the fire acts like a fumigating agent to keep out pests, and that they can succeed in keeping out the pests for upwards of 3 to 4 months. They do not keep, or they do not store in this particular manner for more than 6 months or 9 months. We also discovered that as you move towards the north of Nigeria, the local farmer had in fact developed his own silo. It is called the rhombus. And that rhombus is constructed with very simple materials that are available locally. And it's conically shaped. They make the material with a mixture of mud and grass and the secretion of some particular trees in the locality. On the inside of the rhombus, it is very cool and dry. They erect the rhombus on stilts. They do something to the stilts. What it is, we don't know yet. That makes it impossible for rats and reptiles to climb up and get inside the rhombus. The rhombus itself could store about 2 bags of grain. They normally build, the farmer would build it just up to his own height. In other words, the taller the farmer, the taller the rhombus. And it's very easy for him to access whatever it is that is stored there. And they're able to keep the grain when it is harvested, if it is harvested during the dry season, for upwards of about 9 months, from the results that we are getting now. In some parts of Anambra State, they came up with a very ingenious method of not in fact storing at all. They store the grain right in the field, right inside the plant. In other words, all that they do is to refuse to harvest and leave the grain in the field until the Harmattan season. They then go to harvest. They are able to store in the field for about 3 months that way, at virtually no cost, excepting the cost of nature, which is zero. So some of these results, are coming out, and every day I'm getting more and more excited. I've already applied to government, to let me acquire a piece of land. Maybe I'm going to become a farmer, at the end of the day, grain farmer or something like that. I have just given you these examples to show that all of these things are there. We have always ignored them. Even the farmer himself, like Paul Richards and Chambers and Mike here have been saying in so many of their publications, even the farmer himself is so very diffident about the technique that is available to him. He doesn't want to talk about it. He does not feel proud about it. He feels that it is what the Bature, like they call them in the north, or the Oyibo in the south, that he brings up, that is superior. Until you then begin to explain to him that, look, your major problem is volume. Virtually everything that you are doing here is appropriate for your purpose. Your major bottleneck, the threshold that you must cross, has to deal with volume. The farmers whose questionnaires that we have looked at now and we have interviewed and observed, many of them, particularly those of them in the two southern states of Nigeria, I said, look, we are ready for the volume. But you see, all these containers, our warehouses, we build them with materials at our backyard. We also build them with our own human labor. Possibly one or two of the sons, will assist. Commercialized production of these native warehouses has not been done at all. And one of the questions we hope to answer is whether it is in fact possible to commercialize, to produce on a large scale. Is it possible, for example, for you to have a mobile factory that will move from village to village and construct these things for them, and do so in such a way as to have a higher volume? One of the things we also found out was that, like the Nigerian Stock Product Institute, that is not too far away from Ibadan, they tried the usual fumigation method, modern fumigation methods, in terms of the application of chemicals. You spray the grain with some sort of chemical. I don't know what the chemicals are. And we found that on a typical Ifedako farm, Ifedako is one of the local governments where we have these farmers, and the laboratory, the grain that was sprayed with the same chemical kept for almost twice as long as the one in the laboratory. Now, of course, this has to be checked. We were not the one, because my own institute does not perform experimental research. But as far as this is concerned, they themselves were the ones that told us that, look, if you left the farmer keeping his grain inside the rhombus and you sprayed it, it will keep for just as long, not twice, sorry, it will keep for just as long as the grain that is stored in a proper aluminium constructed silo. So really, the only difference there was in volume. Could we then get volume into the rural area? Volume in such a way as to continue to use their local raw materials. Now, of course, from my own personal my own personal objective in getting involved into this exercise, which was to solve a problem or at least make presentations to government as to how we can solve this problem over 1 to 2 years, I can begin to see that it may not be quite as easy as I had thought. That if the problem was that of volume, we in fact may need more than 1 year to be able to create the volume. Volume either in terms of multiplying the number of rumbles or multiplying the number of platforms on the fireplace in such a way as to catch that 30 to 40% that is wasted on the small farm, arising out of poor indigenous storage techniques. We have started, like I said earlier, on a very exciting exercise. And I can see the scenarios in front of me, the way things are likely to work out. I will be the first one to claim that what we're doing is not profound, it's not even unique. It does not deserve somebody shouting Eureka all over the place. Because you see, and this is the point that all those who are studying indigenous knowledge systems have been trying to dramatize. You see, the knowledge has always been there. It has been there in an experimental sense. It has been there arising out of trial and error. It has always served its purpose to the farmer. All that is required is to go and identify it, study it, document it, and possibly be able to replicate it, somewhere else. That is all that is required. A lot of our colleagues in Nigeria have looked at grain. They have looked at grain storage, but they have looked at it only at the periphery, as a tangential matter. We are now looking at it as a central matter, as a core matter, arising from the fact that, like I said earlier, grain in fact constitutes the largest single component of the food basket in my country. Now, on the basis of what we have done so far, it is quite clear to me that something in a structural sense has to be done with the mobilization of indigenous knowledge techniques. And one of the ideas that I got arose from a study of the grasshopper, that was done back at my university by Professor Toye, there are 3 or 4 of them. They play around with insects a lot, what do they call them? Entomologists or something like that. That's it. They studied the grasshopper. And they did something that was good, which was that before they commenced on their study of the grasshopper, they decided to conduct at the same time an ethno-scientific investigation also of the grasshopper. And the sorts of things that the ethno-scientific investigation was coming up with was in fact corroborating what they were finding out on the basis of the structured scientific study. They were surprised, for example, that the local farmers in the area where they studied knew everything about the behavior of the grasshopper. They knew that the grasshopper always moved in and out with the rain, with the moisture. They knew about the geography, of the egg laying area. They knew about the behavior of the grasshopper when they wanted to go about egg laying. They also knew how to handle the egg laying area in terms of total excavation of the place and the way they disposed of it. So by the time the scientists had done their own study and they put up their recommendations, they found that exactly those things that they were recommending were the things that the farmers had always been doing. So what was the whole purpose at the end of the day? Now, of course, they were then lucky that by the time government decided to pick up the results of their study, it was very easy to get the farmer to adopt. In fact, the farmers turned around to tell them that, look, what you are asking us to do, we have always been doing here. Those of them that were literate enough were able to draw the shape, the inside topography of the egg-laying area. So that if you then wanted to fumigate or to put insecticides inside the egg-laying area before you excavate, you have to direct the sprays from some particular angles in order to be able to reach. They had been doing it through smoking fumigation. All that they did was to dig a hole straight down on the side of the egg-laying area. They had some leaves, eru, dried. I'm one of these terrible Nigerians, I can hardly remember some of these native names. Anyway, it's eru. You put eru down that hole and you fired it. And the smoke from the eru entered inside, the catacombs, the egg-laying area, and everything simply collapsed and you excavate it. And that was the end of the matter until the next season. Now, of course, the scientists couldn't come up with that. They were thinking of chemicals that have been prepared by ICI and Upjohn, and the rest of them, wanting us to import again. But those things had always been there. Without waiting for the results of our work, we are already running and trying to get not only the various research institutes but also government to do a number of things. As far as research methodology is concerned, we have recommended to government, if they are the ones going to finance the research, or they are the ones going to take the loan from the World Bank, IPAD, or whatever other organization, if they are the ones going to take the loan, then they must insist that before the study is done, there must first of all be an ethno-scientific investigation of that matter. Whatever it is that is to be studied, the first port of call, go and meet the people first. Ask them, watch them, study them. How have they been solving that problem? Have they been doing so effectively and efficiently? Document. It is only after that would the formal structured research then begin. Secondly, if government wants to set up, this again if government wants to set up an agricultural facility, it could be either a storage. That was another thing that we found out. Nigeria has strategic storage reserves all over the country. And in selecting those storage sites, government treated the distribution, the geographical distribution, as if it was an amenity. You put a silo in the state, and all you needed to do was to go to the governor of that state to allocate a piece of land. Now, some of the states, of course, allocated pieces of land that were unsuitable for the modern silos. Unsuitable either in terms of the geomorphology of the area, unsuitable either in terms of the ecology of the area, unsuitable in terms of the humidity of the area, unsuitable in terms of the presence of certain pests or insects in the area. So the result was that recently, when government decided that it wanted to open up, some of these storage facilities, they found that the grains that had been stored in them, or that even some of the buildings and the structures were already in a decrepit state, arising from the fact that they probably erected the thing on a clay substructure, the top of which held of water, and of course the building was already humid before it was ready to be used for the storage of whatever. Whereas, by the time you drove only 2 or 3 kilometers from that spot, there were already farmers who already had their own storage facilities, and they did not have the problems of nature, of the soil, of humidity, and that sort of thing. So arising from that, the recommendation is then put up that whenever any facility was going to be put up, whether it is a storage facility, whether it is an agricultural station, whether it is a farm, an extension station, first of all, go and ask the people in that area, how do they normally do that activity that you now want to bring up in a modern dimension in that area? Learn from them first of all. You may then decide. In other words, An institute like mine, where what we do is really very comprehensive, we can go from studying an iron and steel plant to studying a very small village farmer, how he grinds. I mean, that is how the broad spectrum of the work that my institute does. And we can do this sort of thing not only for government, but also for private enterprise. We are now saying that back at base, all our studies now, feasibility studies now that have to do with agriculture, we start first of all going to that place and finding out. You will in fact then discover that you don't need to do any additional work thereafter. And that has already happened with our study of the tobacco culture, in Nigeria. And you need to go any large scale, in producing tobacco. Just simply use this small farmer on his location, inside his village. If he requires any additional help from you, let him be the one to come to you. Just tell him you are ready to help him. Not money now, but in terms of his production systems, in terms of his processing systems, in terms of his storage systems. If he requires, let him come to you. If he does not come to you, no problem. You may, in fact, like the Nigerian Tobacco Company had discovered, that farmers themselves had in fact been doing some crossbreeding by trial and error. They didn't know it was crossbreeding, but they had been mixing things together one way or the other. And they were getting up strains of tobacco leaf, that was much more suitable for their area. So every study that has to be done, that ought to be done, should then start first of all studying. Every agricultural facility that has to be done